Hello and welcome to the European Football Show's Europa League preview. In the build up to the upcoming game week, we are dissecting each fixture with an assortment of guests from around the world. In today's clip, we look at Sheriff Tiraspol versus Sporting Club de Braga, one of the many exciting matchups waiting for us this Thursday. And to go in depth on Sheriff, I'm joined by Robert. Robert's a data scout for Transfermarkt and a reporter on Moldovan football news. Robert, how are we doing?
Hello, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, brilliant to have you on. And I mean, Sheriff, they're a big name on the European scene now after what was a pretty long decade where barely anyone really registered them in the mainstream. I would say this performance in the Champions League. I mean, they were ridiculed going into the competition and then took to the fields of San Siro and the Santiago Bernabeu and really shocked audiences. So if you look at this and now seeing them drop into the Europa League, do you think this brings them confidence to go into this lower stage and potentially even compete for the latter stages? Or do you now see them floundering as a bit of this prestige and uniqueness wears off?
Well, I think it's still a great achievement for the club to be there right now. But as you maybe have seen, or the visitors of your podcast may have seen, they have a big loss of key players because of their European campaign. In my opinion, the best player of the 2021 season, Cristiano left, left back, great defender, and also very good at the attacking part, and also some other key players. So yeah, all in all, it will be a complete different team compared to the team who beat Real Madrid or fought against Inter or Shakhtar in the group stages.
Yeah, I think it won't just be a different team, but it's also going to be a team that's a bit out of rhythm. You know, you look at the schedule and you see that Sheriff actually haven't played a competitive fixture since the 28th of November, and the Moldovan top flight doesn't return until the 13th of March. So a really crazy winter break, which isn't even rivaled in the likes of Ukraine or Russia. I mean, obviously, this must impact their chances going into the Europa League. And do you think this added rest time could potentially help them as you see other sides hampered by a big European fixture list with constant domestic matches, or is it like I said before, kind of something that sees them completely out of the rhythm and won't see them up for a big match against a club like Sporting Club de Braga?
I think it's a big disadvantage for Sheriff that they didn't play since 2 months now, because they played some friendly games against local clubs, but they're yeah, not the same level. They're more or less, they're of course pro players, but the level in for example Germany or UK would be amateur level where they play at. So they don't have a real opponent, and because of the COVID situation, they didn't go abroad to Turkey training camp like they did before. So they didn't have a real opponent to check how the new players, how they adapt. So it's a big disadvantage for them, in my opinion. They always struggled in the past at the first European qualifier stages, first stage, second stage, because they have a lack of European speed in their league. So it will be very difficult for them.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And just to finish this off, then, if you had to summarize in maybe just one or two sentences where Sheriff can win this matchup. So if they were to win, where would that kind of come from? Is it a key player or a tactic that they have?
Well, I think everything depends on their goalkeeper, Athanasiadis, if he is in the form of against Real Madrid, and also Sebastian Thiel and Adama Traoré. They can change and win games on their own. The other players are not on their level, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the departure of Cristiano, but still having a guy like Sebastian Thiel for the second half of the season is a major coup because we saw what he could do from dead balls or open play in that Champions League run. And then, of
Yeah.
course, if looking on the other side, I mean, you had to summarize then in maybe one or two sentences where Sheriff could lose this matchup. You mentioned the fact that they aren't regularly contested in their normal domestic top flight, the fact that they've been out of rhythm for so long. So there's quite a few factors, but what is like the key one which you would pin pin your doubts on?
The lack of quality players. Two main players are missing the first game due to the suspension. So the lack of quality and the lack of, as we said before, a lack of playing time will be the main part if they lost the game. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. So the verdict is looking a little bit damper at the end. The lack of quality and lack of routine isn't exactly what you want going into a big Europa League fixture. So if you had to put your heart on the line, who's going through this one? Is it Club de Braga or will the Moldovan champions go even further on this fantastic European adventure?
Well, I think it will be very tough for Braga, but I think they will succeed in the second leg at home. But it will be a close one.
Well, Robert, you're our first guest to go against your home side, so it's not looking optimistic from your end. But I think we can all be excited for a fantastic fixture, anyways.
Yeah, I think so. And okay,
Brilliant. Thanks. Perfect.
thanks.
Okay, so that was some fantastic insight from our Moldovan football expert. And now we move on to the other side of this equation, the opponent, Sporting Club de Braga. The Archbishops, as they're nicknamed, they came through in second place in the Europa League in a qualifying group that consisted of Red Star Belgrade, FC Midtjylland, and Ludogorets Raskrad. To profile their chances, we're now joined by Proxima Jornada owner Aaron. Aaron, how are we doing?
Not too bad. Great to be on here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, great to have you on. And I want to get right into it. I mean, let's briefly summarize Braga's outlook in the Portuguese league before we talk about the Europa League chances. They seem to be in an odd position, almost sandwiched between the rest of the pack and that traditional big three of Sporting, Porto, and Benfica. So, really, to get into this, just like to ask, how do you see this outlook kind of changing in the coming years? Do you think they have the chance of breaking into this top three, or think that all elusive first title will still be out of their reach in the next few years?
Yeah, to be honest, I think something drastic has to change in Portuguese football if that is to happen. It's no coincidence that there's only been two occasions in the history of Portuguese football that teams outside of the big three have won the league. So only 5 teams have ever won it, and that was Belenenses in 1945 and Boavista in 2001. So over 2 decades ago, and then since then, it's just complete dominance from the big three. Each has their own a sort of period of dominance, maybe 2 or 3 years, and then usually another rival would then come into the fray. So very difficult, to be honest. And last season actually looked maybe the closest they were going to get to doing it. But even this season, they're performing nowhere near the level that they were at last season in terms of, I think at this point, last season they were second in the league. And they're now fourth, as you say. They're sort of back in that Braga spot of fourth place, only that position looks a little bit less secure this season as well. They've got teams behind them in Gil Vicente who are only 4 points away. So I think, yeah, something drastic would have had to happen to the big three teams. They'd all have to have this sort of meltdown because financially they're much better equipped than Braga. So as interesting as it would be, I don't predict that happening within the next couple of years anyway.
Yeah, and if you say that the league title is perhaps out of reach, then maybe it's even more important to focus on the Europa League. And this is, of course, a competition which they made it all the way to the final in 2011, of course, beaten by Porto on that occasion, a domestic rival. But in their past 3 participations, they've always bowed out in this first intermediary round. So how do you foresee them faring this time around against a Sheriff Tiraspol side, which is a bit hard to judge?
I think he's spot on in terms of the difficulty of judging. I think Braga gave a good performance in the Europa League. In the group stage, they'd be kicking themselves to have not won the group because they had chances to. I think in that last game when they lost 3-2, if they would have drawn the game, they'd have been level on points maybe and went through. But yeah, so I think difficult to judge. They were good going forward, which to be honest has been the strengths and weaknesses is that going forward they scored the most out of that Europa League group stage, but I think they also conceded the most. They definitely conceded more than Red Star, and that's been a problem for them not only in the Europa League but also in the Premier League. It is just conceding too many goals. So they've got quite a young squad. That's something Carlos Carvajal is trying to implement, is bringing youngsters, bringing players who came through the Braga Academy into the first team. But then, of course, they've also lost a massive player in Galeno to Porto, not only for what he gives to Braga, what he gives to Braga in the Europa League. He's absolutely phenomenal. His statistics in that competition alone are absolutely phenomenal. So being without him will be a big blow, both in terms of sort of defensively and offensively, with him playing as a wing back on occasion and also further forward as a wide midfielder. So I think they'll be approaching this game, I think, a little bit with caution, knowing that they can't really afford to go a goal or two down, because the rate that they're on at the moment, especially in the league, is they're conceding at least a goal a game. I think after 21 games, they've conceded 22. Defensively, it's just not good enough. They need to be tighter at the back. And as I say, it's an inexperienced back line, with the exception of the likes of Paulo Oliveira. They've got some real young players in there. So I think they'll just have to be really disciplined and hope that they can go a little bit further, because, as you say, the last couple of seasons it has been disappointing. They were able to go far, a couple of seasons ago, and as you mentioned, getting to the final as well. But since then, hasn't really been too great for them in the Europa League. And that'll be something they're looking to, a competition they're always looking to go far, and it's just not really happened in recent years.
Yeah, perfect. And it seems like you almost had it on the tip of your tongue at the end when we go into this next question, which is just, in one or two sentences, what is Braga's key strength that will see them win this matchup?
Going forward, I think that sort of attacking prowess. I mentioned before about the departure of Galeno will obviously be difficult, but they do score goals. They do get forward. They are creative. They have a young forward there in Vitinha, who's sort of really came into his own this season. His goals, minutes per goal, is absolutely astonishing, to be honest, in terms of the numbers he's putting up across all competitions. So yeah, they're a young squad, and I think that'll be something that benefits them as well. Is that youth, perhaps that fearlessness, not having those sort of memories of times being eliminated before and being able to just go into the game with that sort of that ruthlessness and that fearlessness that young players can have. But then, as you say, moving on to the weaknesses, it can also, the other side of the coin is defensively coming up against sides like Sheriff, who are sort of serial winners at domestic level, always involved in European competition. They might have players that have got that edge, that have got that experience, and that can maybe take advantage of a very young Braga backline. But depending on the team that Carvajal goes with, he'll be hoping to rectify some of those defensive issues, and we should see a really good game.
Yeah, and really good game. But the final question here, a really good game isn't enough for our viewers. They also want a prediction. So, Aaron, who's going through in this matchup? Is it going to be Braga? Is it going to be the Portuguese heart and soul? Or is it going to be Sheriff Tiraspol, like you said, serial winners from Moldova?
I don't like making predictions, to be honest, because they make fools of us all. But I mean, I'm always going to go with the Portuguese. I don't know too much about Sheriff to be able to make a prediction of how the game they're going to play and how they're going to play. And I think it's always difficult to know how strong an opponent is. So I'll back Braga, and I hope that they go through. But we'll see. We'll see.